Hey guys, welcome to the channel. In today's video we're going to talk about prepping our spring beds. So let's go ahead and get started with a little bit of cleanup. The first thing you're going to want to do is remove any fibrous material in your beds. So that includes things like sticks, vines, and other things that you might not consider. So take for example this okra stump here. I grew this past fall and the plant died, and I went ahead and cut those down, but what is left is this stump. And I have an example here. As the stump starts to decay, it's not decaying fast enough for the tiller to be able to break it up, and it turns into these long fibrous strands like this. And these strands will quickly wrap around the tines or the drive shaft of your tiller or your cultivator, making it very difficult to break those up. So what you're going to want to do is use a shovel or something and dig up the larger stumps for your larger plants. You might not have this problem with smaller plants because their root systems and their stumps are soft enough for the tiller to just break apart. Something else that you want to look for when you're cleaning up your beds are the pests that you might not want. For example, a whole pile of ants that have made this place their home. You're also going to want to make sure and pull up any invasive grasses, and that includes getting the roots too. It might be tempting to go ahead and take these roots and just grind them into the ground, and maybe they'll decompose like most of the organic matter in your beds. But for some weeds or some grasses, that's not exactly how it happens. In most cases, they mix in with that nice rich garden soil, and then they immediately explode, and you have a much more invasive problem later on in the growing season. So it's worth taking a little bit of time, putting on a pair of gloves, and pulling up all the grass and the weeds that you see. Again, making sure to get them up by the root. One other tricky element to remember when cleaning out your beds are any shallow buried lines that you may have. So for example, this bed had a misting system that I installed to help keep the plants watered. And this one was fairly easy to remember because I had it set on top of the ground like that. But even in a simple system like this, you have to remember that when you pull them up, to make sure and get the small stakes that you used whenever you were installing the system. That allows you to reuse them, but it also keeps them from littering your soil or maybe jamming the machine when you're trying to cultivate. This next step is entirely optional, and it depends on the health of your soil. For this raised bed, I'm going to add both compost and fertilizer. The compost will help to improve the health of the microorganisms already existing in the bed, which will also lead to healthier plants. I'm also adding a well-balanced fertilizer because this bed is going to start its life as a vegetable garden, but about mid-spring it's going to transition into a flower bed. Application of the compost is pretty straightforward. Just open up the bags and spread it across the bed. The fertilizer, on the other hand, takes a slightly gentler approach. What I like to do is use a solo cup, and I tilt it ever so slightly and just shake it across the bed, putting very little fertilizer. And I do this going back and forth across the bed, and what that does is give me time to overlap the bed a few times, evenly distributing the fertilizer, and also making sure that I don't accidentally pour a huge clump of fertilizer at any given point in the bed. When you're spreading out your compost, you're not looking to get a perfectly level bed at this point. What you're really going for is just to get consistent coverage. In the next step, we're going to use a power cultivator, and that'll help to incorporate the new mulch that we've put down with the native soil that already exists in the bed. Now that the soil's been amended, the next step is to cultivate it. And that has three benefits. The first is that it takes all of our new amendments and mixes them into the native soil. The second is that it helps to break up the roots from the previous crops, making them smaller and thus decaying a little bit faster. And for my purposes, the third benefit is that it makes the topsoil, or the top of the soil, very fine. So when you're starting out with a small crop, like lettuce for example, it's easier to sow the seeds or to put small transplants in place. For today's job, we're going to use a power cultivator. This is not a tiller. This is not meant to dig deeply into the soil, but to work at a very shallow level, anywhere between 3 to 6 inches. That allows us to mix the soil, the new amendments, into our topsoil without affecting the existing microorganisms that are deep within the soil. When working with your cultivator, you want to make sure and keep a counter pressure on the handles, using the wheels as a pivot point to keep the tines from digging in too deeply. Again, what we're looking for is only a 3 to 6 inch depth, trying to mix in our new soil amendments with the existing soil in the bed. The way I like to think about it is consider doing this job with a garden trowel. It's very short and shallow, and if you put it into the soil and use it to turn the soil, then you wouldn't be able to go very deep and you wouldn't turn much soil. But on the other hand, if you were to use a shovel, you could go a lot deeper, turning more soil and also disturbing the ecosystem of the existing soil. Remember, we're just trying to mix the top layers of soil and break down any large clumps to make it easier for planting. Now that the soil's been nicely tilled or cultivated and broken down into nice fine pieces, you can just take a regular old garden rake like this and level it out nice and smooth, and you'll have a bed ready for whatever you're going to sow or transplant into it. If you're working with seeds though, I also recommend that you reach for your leaf rake or your yard rake. What I like to do is take it tines down and just very, very lightly kind of pass it across the very top of the bed like that. And what'll happen is it'll level it off nicely, but it'll also help to remove any large chunks like these that might sit on top of the soil and make it difficult for you to put down a pattern for placing your transplants or finding straight rows for sowing your seeds. All right guys, that's it. Last step was leveling. You now have yourself a brand new bed ready for whatever you're going to grow this coming spring. As for the bed behind me, it's for these guys, some fresh lettuce starts. If you found this content helpful, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you want more content like this, feel free to subscribe. My name's Eric and this is Growing Crazy, and thanks for watching.